Hi everyone, welcome back to Emphasis Added, a podcast brought to you by the Houston Law Review. I'm one of your season 7 hosts, Tammy Bankole.
And I'm your other season 7 host, Tiari Vincent. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice that we're not in the Houston Law Review office. Today we have the honor of filming in the chambers of our very distinguished guest, Justice Veronica Rivas-Molloy of the First Court of Appeals. Thank you, Justice, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. We always like to begin our show by discussing our guest background and allowing the audience to become better acquainted with our guest. Can you please tell us about your upbringing in El Paso, Juárez border, and what it is like growing up there?
Yes, so first thank you, Tammy and Thierry, for coming on board to Chambers and mounting your podcast here. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited to be able to talk to you guys this morning and to your audience as well. Thank you. So I was originally born in Mexico. I was born in Chihuahua, and that's about 3 hours south of the border from Texas. But I grew up primarily along the Texas area, the border between El Paso and Juárez. So it was really interesting, when you grow up along the border, truly what divides two countries is just very narrow river, right? And so it's the juxtaposition of living in two different countries that have very different systems of law, very different systems of governance. But it is multicultural, so it's wonderful. I was raised in this multicultural area where I really got to continue to enjoy the richness of my culture, but also completely appreciate, just the opportunity of this country and the rule of law and its system of law. So it's this juxtaposition, but I think it kind of informs you. I think most border kids would say that we have a unique upbringing for that reason.
Well, that's so lovely to hear. I'm also an immigrant, so it's definitely lovely experiencing two different cultures. Like, that's amazing to hear.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you have such a unique upbringing. So what initially drew you to law as a career?
Yeah, I don't think so. I was very young. I think I remember because people have asked me this question. I was very interested in the law, and I think it was partially because of what I mentioned. You have this juxtaposition of seeing the systems and how different they are. My father was in law enforcement, so I think I had that unique perspective of how the law impacted the daily lives of people. I'm an immigrant, so I think probably having to go through the process of the immigration system. Also, I think just from a very young age, I had a very unique understanding of how laws can really impact your daily lives. It's not just something that happens when some crisis occurs, but just regular daily lives can be really impacted. So, but even then, I kind of had an understanding of what that meant. I really loved criminal law, just understanding again what your individual rights are, what protections you're afforded under the Constitution, and just learning about that when I was really young. I think we were exposed in elementary school. I remember the district attorney at the time for El Paso came to speak to us, and I had no idea what a district attorney was. I was very young, but I was very impressed by him. And the fact that he was a minority, I think for me, it was the first time that kind of opened up my eyes. It was like, oh, this is a very interesting area of the law. So not surprisingly, I became interested in the law, and I was interested in criminal law. That was my first real exposure. And then, I think I was one of those geeky kids that kind of just knew from the time I was 9 that I really, really wanted to go to law school and study the law.
Well, that's lovely, and it's always important to learn about what your rights are, criminally or constitutionally. So it's interesting that at a young age you're interested in something like that. So outside of your work on the bench, what do you enjoy doing to recharge or to spend time with your family?
Yeah, and that's really important. I think we often forget about that. I always tell people the profession of the law is a very jealous profession. It can consume a lot of your time. So I have 3 sons. They're getting a little bit older. I have one in college, a junior, and an 8th grader. And we love sports. We're like big sports fanatics. And we love experiences, right? I like traveling with my kids, but more than that, we spend a lot of time together. So we're at home, we play board games, and we have our downtime every night. No matter how busy we are, at the end of the day, everybody has to put their devices away, come and spend a little bit family time, even if it's just 15, 20 minutes. We all sit down, we chat, and everybody goes to bed. But we love soccer, so I grew up watching soccer, and my kids all played soccer. My husband played soccer, and we're huge fans. We're super excited for the World Cup.
Yeah,
very, very excited.
Yes.
So we're season ticket holders at the Dynamo, so we go to those games all the time. But yeah, so sporting events of any kind, basketball, sporting events. And then I try to, we're so lucky that we live here in Houston where we have so many choices of things to do. I just took my kids to go see The Outsiders. So that was a lot of fun to go see that musical. But also just spending time with family. My extended family is here. So I have my mom and my sister, so we do a lot of get-togethers. Just have cookouts or get-togethers and just really spending that family time and really bonding as a family.
That sounds so wholesome. It took a while for me to call it soccer because I always used to call it football.
Because that's the right way.
That's the right way to say it.
Sorry, audience. I'm saying soccer because we're in the U.S., but it really is football. Yeah, we love football. Yeah, exactly.
It's nice to know that you find time to stay grounded and stay connected with your family, considering your career is so busy and that you are so accomplished. So, you did your clerkship and then you moved to litigation and now you sit on the appellate bench. So can you just tell us kind of what inspired you to pursue this and maybe walk us through your journey from clerking to doing litigation to eventually running for the Court of Appeals?
The whole 20 years. Well, I think, I always tell people, I think we all have our plans, right? But there's a lot of serendipity involved in it, and just the ability to be flexible and kind of move with the opportunities that are presented to you. When I went to law school, I thought I was going to be a district attorney at some point. I wanted to be an assistant DA. I wanted to prosecute crimes. But then I got to law school, and then I was exposed, as you guys are in the middle of this, you get exposed to so many different areas of the law. And as a first-generation college student and attorney, I didn't have any attorneys in my family. So I didn't have a whole lot of exposure to the different areas of the law. So I came to law school thinking I was going to do one thing. I started experiencing different areas of the law, and I still remember I was just happened to be sitting in the Commons area at the time, my first year. And I heard a student who was on law review talk about how she was super excited that she had gotten a clerkship. And I was sitting there with another one of my really good friends from law review, and we looked at each other. I was like, well, what is that? What is the clerkship? We didn't have a system then where it was a very formalized application process, and she told us what it was. It was working for a judge. And we thought, well, that sounds really great. So I remember thinking, okay, well, we should probably apply. And she said, yeah, the applications are due on Monday, and this was Friday. So my good friend and I said, okay, we're both interested. There's about 50 judges that we're going to go apply to. And there was no centralized system, so we divided it up 25 and 25. And this, we're gonna completely date me. There was a public phone in the Commons at the law review. So we each used the public phones, and he called 25 judges' chambers, and I called the other 25 to figure out what requirements we had to meet. And that weekend, we put all the packets together, and we sent out 50 applications. So I was very blessed that I was able to have an opportunity to interview for Judge Ewan Werlein Jr. and to have the opportunity to clerk for him for 2 years. And so that really exposed me to completely, he did both, of course, in federal court, criminal and civil, so I had the opportunity to see both sides of it, but I really fell in love with civil litigation and litigation as well. I knew I wanted to be a litigator, and I got the opportunity to see people in court almost on a daily basis. So that was wonderful. So I knew then, okay, this is really what I want to do, and I was very fortunate to have, by then, an offer from Baker Botts to come join them in their litigation department after my clerkship. And so I was able to, with my clerkship experience, very early on, be able to litigate cases at Baker Botts. So I remember my very first project that I got on when I came on Baker Botts, we had a team of attorneys who were going to go litigate a case in Beaumont, and they were going to go to trial in 2 weeks. So I got there one day, and the next day they were like, you're coming with us to trial because you clerked and you know how to do charges and you know how to argue charges, so let's go. So I just packed up my things and we went to Beaumont for a trial my very first week that I was there. So it was great. I got to worked with very smart attorneys, learned a lot while I was at Baker Botts, did a lot of litigation. And then from there, I was there for, several years. And then from there, I had an opportunity to help open up the office at Jones Walker. So I moved there to be able to help them open up their office, and I worked there for 10 years. And it was then that I started transitioning from litigation to starting to do some appellate work. And I kept both practices because I really liked the variety of the two, but then that's when I started really getting interested in that. And then fast forward 10 years after that, I really started thinking about, I had already thought about maybe one day potentially running to be a judge, but I really had to sit and pause and thought, okay, where can I bring the best value? Where will my skill set fit the best? And at the time, I thought that would be here in the Court of Appeals because of my appellate experience, but also because the Court of Appeals had a civil docket that was growing in nature, more civil cases than criminal cases, and I thought I could really bring that skill set to the court.
That sounds so great. That's a great journey and very inspiring. So what did your campaign experience teach you, both professionally and personally?
Yes, that was really interesting because as lawyers, as you know, we just work. We do our jobs. We're lawyers. And in Texas, as you know, judges have to run in partisan elections, which is a very unusual thing. And I wasn't a political person, so it was kind of have to learn, how does this work? Like, how does one run for office? Where do you even file your petition? Like, what do you have to do? So, I talked to some good friends who are already on the bench to get their advice to see what I needed to do. And the interesting thing about particularly campaigning when you're sitting on the Court of Appeals is our jurisdiction is over 10 counties. And so you're not just running in Harris County or Houston proper, right? So you're Galveston, Fort Bend, Brazoria, and then many other counties contiguous to that. So it was really getting out of your comfort zone, which is just your legal work, and learning that process of campaigning and getting your voice heard and getting out there and meeting voters. But one of the things that I loved about it is I always tell people, I would have never met the people that I met, or I would not have ever visited places that I met, but for my campaign. And so it got me outside of the legal world to talk to just normal people and to take that opportunity to educate people about our judicial system. Like, why are courts important? What do judges do? What do we do when you're not a lawyer and you're a teacher or a doctor or stay-at-home mom? Everybody wants to know, what is it that we're doing, and why am I asking you for your vote? Why do I deserve that trust? So for me, it was an opportunity to meet new people and to ask them questions like, what do you think about our courts? Like, do you think they're fair? Do you think they're not fair? What would you like to see in your judges? So really an educational process for me to hear like the pulse of the community, like what are they feeling, but also the opportunity for me to inform them about why our courts are so important and why they should really care about the judges who sit and preside over those courts.
Interesting. And that's a really daunting task.
Yeah.
I feel like lawyers kind of get in their lawyer bubble and you interact with only lawyers and you sit at your desk. So it's interesting to hear that you had to get out and talk to, the everyday person. And we know now that you won and you were elected. So how did it feel to become the first immigrant elected to the Court of Appeals and only the third Hispanic woman to serve on this court?
So I wasn't focused. I actually didn't learn that fact until after I was running. I wasn't focused on, am I going to be the first immigrant or the third Latina? I mean, certainly I'm very proud of the fact that I, at the time that I was running, for me it was important for me to represent those communities well, right? Because I represent both as a woman of color and as an immigrant. It's important for me to, I understand the responsibility that I carry when I represent those communities, and it was important for me to represent them with dignity and integrity and excellence. Once I got on the court, realizing, what you just mentioned, being the first immigrant on the court and only the third Latina, it's not, I try to explain to people, it's not that it's important for me to be here just because I think it creates opportunities for people who have my experience and look like me. but it's a matter of just opening up the imagination of even children or younger people, that when you see people who look like you in positions of trust and positions of importance, you know, you imagine yourself in those places. And so for me, for example, the example that I gave you earlier, to have a DA come and talk to me as a young elementary school student, it was the first time that I imagined myself in those roles. So that's so I'm glad that I'm able to, if you know, allow a child or someone else to think about being in these places, to knowing that this is completely a possibility with hard work and dedication.
That sounds great. Representation is so important. Like, I'm sure like so many people look up to you, and so that is great that you're representing your community. So many listeners are curious as to what an appellate judge day-to-day looks like. So can you tell us what a week looks like for you in the First Court of Appeals?
Yes. So I would definitely say, if you do not like reading, this job is not for you. So, yeah, you're right. So we hear our jurisdiction, we hear civil cases, we hear probate cases, family, and criminal law. So we're a court of general jurisdiction. So we hear every single case that is appealed from our entry-level courts in 10 jurisdictions. So, you know, those cases are assigned to us. There's 9 judges who sit on the First Court of Appeals. And so what we do is we take these appeals, and of course we render decisions on those or dispose of these appeals. We work in groups of 3, right? I'm in a panel of 3 judges, and we sit together for 3 months, and then we shuffle again. So you're in 4 different panels throughout the year. And when we work together as judges, my responsibility is to be in charge of so many appeals a week. So on average, as a panel, we hear about 6 appeals a week. And so what that means for me is I have to review the briefs that were filed in each of those cases. Tiare knows this because the briefs are usually span between 50 and 80 pages each. So it's reading the briefs that were filed, the appellant's brief, the appellate's brief, and the reply. And then after that, you look at the clerk's record, which comprises all the documents that were filed in the trial court below. So you review all of those, the petition, the pleadings, the motions for summary judgment, the motions for new trials, whatever the issues are presented. And then if there was a trial or a hearing, you separately review the reporter's record, which is a transcript of all the hearings. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of reviewing. You want to make sure that you become very well informed, as if you are almost overseeing the trial yourself, that you understand exactly what issues were presented, how they were decided, what arguments were made, and what evidence was presented. So once you review all of that, then now you get down to the legal issues, right? So reviewing the law, researching, understanding the application of the law to the facts, and then the most difficult part is starting to draft a draft of the opinion. And so I work very closely with my attorneys. I have a wonderful, wonderful staff that works with me here, and so they help me write the opinion that we then discuss as a panel together. So we meet once a week with our panel to discuss it, and if we agree, then we start massaging the opinion to finally becomes finalized and out the door. So day to day, a lot of reading, a lot of researching, and a lot of revising and editing opinions. And then you have the emergencies that are coming in sometimes, because we have other types of original proceedings and emergencies that come in. So then we handle those as they're coming in on a weekly basis.
Wow, that sounds very, very busy, like a very busy week.
It definitely. I didn't tell the audience, but I did spend a summer with Justice Veronica-Molloy a couple years ago now, and so I can attest that it is a lot of work, but they are very hardworking and very efficient to get through the amount of cases.
Yes, and Terry did a great job. She did a great job as an intern. We were very, very happy and privileged to have you here in our chambers.
Thank you. So what kind of cases or issues do you find most challenging or rewarding?
Yes. So I know it's going to sound, I mean, I think one of the reasons I love being on this course, you know, just given every case, we have so many. And so I try to remind myself each day and every day, every case, while it's one of many for me, it's the one and only for that person and that party. You know, sometimes when you happen to be a company or corporation who deals with litigation often, maybe not, but with that one person whose individual life is being touched, that might be their only interaction with the court system in their lifetime. So all of the cases I care about a lot, and they're challenging because despite the fact that I have been working on the bench for 5 years and the fact that I'm now in my almost 25th year of practice, it's still, I'm, yeah, it's still for me a learning experience. You just don't know, you think you have your area of expertise and you do, but when you come in the Court of Appeals, you learn how much you don't know already. Because there's so many different areas of the law. So for me, the challenge is making sure that I challenge myself to learn. As I'm reading each case, the new area of the law, to make sure that I have full grasp on it. And even the areas of the law that I feel comfortable with, making sure that I don't feel that, push yourself out of the comfort zone and continue to learn and make sure that you're not just remaining stagnant. So the cases are challenging for that reason, because it's a constantly new area of the law. And of course, you have some that have difficult and sad circumstances, right? We have very sad family cases, criminal cases that deal with very heavy subject areas. And so those are difficult for the personal circumstances that are presented. But yeah, they're all challenging. I mean, it's just important for me to just take the time to consider each one of them individually.
That's so interesting, because you've written more than 180 majority opinions. So how does that accomplishment feel? I know when I interned here, the First Court of Appeals has a very low number of dissents and separate writings. And so I think it's something to be proud of, having 180 and very minimal dissent. So how does that feel, especially how you mentioned a lot of your cases are new and they're challenging, and you really want to take your time on each one of them and give everyone equal consideration. So I guess, how do you approach that, having such a heavy docket?
Well, I think the main thing is just making sure that, like I said, we have wonderful staff. I mean, my staff is fantastic. The attorneys that work here, some of them, have been here far longer than I have. So the institutional knowledge they bring and the ability to understand not just the importance of each case, but the fact that we also need to make sure that we're ruling quickly and effectively, because, you don't want to wait too long to issue your opinions. So, I mean, it's just working very diligently and trying to really hone in on the legal issues and to be able to, I am very blessed, though. I work with colleagues who are very collegial. I mean, we get along very well, and we're able to work out. The main thing for us, it's important for the jurisprudence to have a unified voice when we're issuing these dispositions. And you're right that we have a court that has not a lot of separate writings, and we take pride in that because we try to reach consensus where we can. Not always, of course. There's always going to be times when you disagree, but even when that happens, we disagree very respectfully. So I value that as a court. But yeah, I think it's just being very mindful, just that you have to keep going. You have to get to these opinions and try to write them with the time they deserve, but not overthink them, because people need to get these opinions. They deserve to have their day in court, but also to have it ruled on, so that they can move on.
Wow, that sounds interesting, and it's such a unique experience. So we know that being an appellate judge has unique responsibilities and challenges. So what has been the most challenging aspect of transitioning from private practice to judging?
Yeah, well, I think what's hard is because, for 20 years, I mean, you're being trained to do that now as you guys transition out into the worlds that you're going to be doing either corporate litigation. But for me, you're so used to being an advocate. You're constantly advocating for your client, for your position, you're arguing. And so when I came on the bench after having been an advocate for such a long time, I was very mindful that I had to take that hat off and kind of just try to be a neutral person, as you're taking in the facts, and not try to advocate one way or the other. So I remember telling my attorneys, you need to make sure that if I'm ever veering off my lane and I'm advocating, you need to call that to my attention immediately. But I think what I've what I very quickly learned, and I think the reason I was able to transition more efficiently is when somebody gave me really good advice who had been on the bench, and they said, look, you're still an advocate, you're just an advocate for the rule of law, right? You're an advocate for the law. That's your client. The client is your constitution, your client are the laws, the rules that apply, and you just need to make sure that they're being applied faithfully and uniformly and correctly. So once I put that in my mind, like, that's absolutely right. I am still an advocate. I'm just an advocate for the system and making sure that, the laws are being imparted and applied faithfully and in a fair manner. So that allowed me to be able to transition in my mind that I'm still an advocate. It's just for a different entity at this time. But I think what I was telling Tiare, the challenging part was really there's a lot to learn. I mean, I tell people it's like your first year of law school all over again. Because remember that first year where everything is new and you're just learning? There are times like that where we're reading these cases and it's a completely different area of the law. And I have to trust that the attorneys are guiding me in their briefs to understand, okay, here are the issues, here you understand them. And you don't want to append some area of the law because you don't understand it correctly. So that's the challenge. You're a constant student of the law, which is one of the things I love most about my job as well, but it is challenging.
I can imagine, I would not do first year of law school again. So
no.
I can understand, though, going into something new and just having to constantly learn. So you took the bench in 2021. So how have you grown as a jurist since then?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I hope that I have in my ability to have a better appreciation. Well, I do. I know that. I have a much better appreciation for how hard the job is. Sometimes as litigants, when we're on the opposite side and we're just litigating for our clients and judges are making decisions, you disagree, or you're like, why is it taking so long? Why am I not getting my decision? Why am I not getting my opinion? But when you come on this side, then you realize just this is really hard. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into writing these opinions and to considering them. And so I hope that I become much more appreciative and compassionate for what it takes, to do this job. I've learned a lot from my colleagues who were here before me, in terms of approaching the job, making sure that things are moving fluidly and efficiently, that you don't have the luxury to, spend months and months on the one single case. Sometimes we do that in private practice. I had the luxury of being able to devote all this time. And so I think hopefully I have learned in terms of being more compassionate and my ability to kind of just go through these cases in a manner that is more efficient but still gives the attention to each case that they deserve.
That's great. Your hard work is obviously showing off. You've received significant recognition recently, including Judge of the Year from the Hispanic Bar Association of Houston and the Judicial Leadership Award from the National Hispanic Bar Foundation. So what do these honors mean to you?
Yeah, humbling. I think it's hard to receive those awards because when you're looking at your own work, you're like, no, I'm just doing my job, right? Mm-hmm. Right? I feel like I'm receiving awards for doing the job that I'm required to do. So I really appreciate the recognition. It's very humbling. I try to pause, and when those things happen, to just be grateful to God and grateful to the sacrifices of my family members, my mom, my dad, because it's really a validation, not just for myself, but for their sacrifice. So I try to really take in the moment, appreciate it. And for me, it's not just validation, but it's really like it energizes me to say, okay, this is the trust that people have put in me. These are the recognitions. I have to keep working hard and I have to keep moving ahead because, people have put this kind of trust in me and have, given me these recognitions, which I'm really grateful for. But it is very humbling.
Well, that's a very lovely way to look at it and to embrace those awards. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's so inspiring to see how far you've come because you were in our position, and we hope to achieve half of what you have. So since this is a Houston Law Review podcast, we love to talk about your own Houston Law Review experience. So how did being on the law review prepare you for your legal career, if at all?
No, absolutely. Well, I remember very well being in your positions, and I'm very proud of both of you for your accomplishments. Before the podcast began, you both were telling me about the wonderful opportunities that you both have, and it's very clear that you have both excelled in law school and also in the outside world. So congratulations to you both for your success.
Thank you.
I think you guys know that being on law review is hard work, and I remember it well. I still remember, I guess, I was on board 38, so it was a little while ago, that we were notified by phone, so I remember getting the phone. I still remember exactly where I was when I got my phone call that I was on law review, and I was very grateful for the opportunity, but immediately very anxious because I knew that was going to require a lot of work. And it did, and I had a fantastic editor-in-chief, managing editor. We had a wonderful, very collegial, but they were very hard workers, and the work ethic that they brought to the table for me was, it was very instructive in my ability to understand that this is the kind of work ethic and excellence that we expect out of our board law review members, but also just in general, just the hard work that required to even get on the law review, right? And so once you're there, the fact that you're working with people who are devoted to their work academically, but also beyond, and that take a lot of honor in the work that they do, that really informed my decision to keep going and to bring that level of excellence and attention to detail, and just take a lot of pride in the work that you do, because it is, it really allows you to take a lot of pride in the work that you do when you put out those when you're printing out the articles and the articles come out and the editions come out and then you see your name on the front cover of that page. That's it's a sense of satisfaction, but you know how much hard work went into it.
Well, that's great. Along those lines, what skills from your time on the journal have been most transferable to your role as appellate judge?
Well, exactly that. I mean, the work ethic that it requires, the attention to detail, the pride in the work that you take to make sure that everything is perfect, right? That you didn't miss a single thing. It's just those little skills that you bring, because everybody has come to law school, has already excelled in some way or another in their undergraduate. Everybody's smart, you bring that skill set. But it's just these additional character skills, just discipline, hard work, dedication, honor, and just pride in the work that you do. I think those are the little skill sets that add to that already, skill set that you bring already when you come to law school.
That's great. What was your role, and what was your law review role?
Law review article. Yep. I was an editor, an articles editor.
Oh, hey, that's lovely.
So I don't know how you guys do it then, but there was a lot of, I had green pencils, and we had to do everything by hand. So we didn't have, I'm sure you guys are editing online, so I would get a physical copy of the first draft of the article, and then I would have to side check it with a colored pencil, blue. I was blue, so we would physically write this in, and then it would go to the next line review, and then they would do the green pencil on top of mine, and then a third person would have to physically input it. Wow. So it was I know you can't see Terry's face, but she's like jaw dropping. Everything was done by hand. It was a lot of work, but so it was. I remember that. I'm sure everything's online and redlining now, but it was
Definitely. I'm really grateful for technology and
I know.
innovation. I couldn't imagine that. I think it's hard enough online.
Yeah, online. Yeah, so I can't even imagine when you guys did it. Wow.
But it is hard work still. Even today, it's hard work. So, in your opinion, how important do you think journal experience is for students interested in appellate practice?
Well, so one of the things, when you're reviewing an article, of course, just understanding the care that went into it. The authors put a lot of time researching the issues, like reviewing articles themselves and the law, and just learning how that it gets put together. In an article with, of course, the introduction and the analysis and the conclusions. It's very much like we do our opinions here in court, right? You have to draw upon resources and do the research, but then put it collectively and cohesively in an opinion that makes sense, that is short and concise, and addresses all the issues and the analysis there. So, having an appreciation for those articles we put together certainly is very like the dispositions that we put together here. So I think in some respects, maybe that's what you're asking me. But yeah, I thought, full circle now what I do is not unlike the authors whose articles you're reviewing now.
Despite your very busy day-to-day, you've also maintained a deep commitment to service. Why has pro bono work been such a consistent part of your career?
Well, I think it started with my very first job. I think when I started working at Baker Botts, I think, they have a very robust pro bono practice there. And I remember very early on, actually, like one of my very first projects was working on a pro bono matter with one of the now judge, but at the time, one of the attorneys that was there. And so I remember it was an eviction notice involving a woman who had not been granted proper notice, and she had kids, and this was her place of residence. And so just being able to represent her and make sure we defended her rights so that everything was done adequately and didn't put her in a bad situation. She obviously could not afford an attorney, so it was, I think it was a very clear example to me. It was something that I always have felt about our profession, that we're very lucky to have a profession that gives us a voice to advocate for others who may not be as fortunate as we are. And so I feel that we do have that responsibility as lawyers to not just, practice for our sake and for our clients, but also to give back a little bit of the gift that we've been given of advocacy. So that was a prime example. And then I got involved in it more, working on various pro bono matters there in my time at Baker Botts. And since then, when I moved over to Jones Walker as well, continued to do pro bono work there. In various forms. I represented unaccompanied minors in immigration proceedings. I represented immigrants who are seeking asylum as well in their immigration proceedings. I represented people in family disputes. I represented people in, different areas of the law. And the discomfort frequently is how are you going to represent people if you don't know the practice areas? But the bar is really good about allowing you and providing you the resources to walk you through the process so that you're able to render these services. And I would encourage not just litigators to do this work, but there are a lot of transactional attorneys and corporate attorneys who can also provide this kind of assistance, both in the context of their transactional practice, but I have friends that I have paired up with our transactional attorneys who have, we worked on pro bono matters together in litigation.
Oh, okay, that's so lovely.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really nice to hear that you've been so intentional in your practice, and throughout your whole career, you've been really aware of your responsibility and kind of your goals and what you want to do. So our next question is, what impact do you hope your time on the bench will have on the legal profession and on future generations of lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds?
Yeah, well, that's a heavy question, right? Well, I hope that I'm able to provide a level of consistency to our jurisprudence, to be able to reflect on my time on the bench as a time where I was able to work diligently and with a lot of respect for the role, and as a caretaker of this particular seat on the court, and trying to make sure that people feel like they were heard, that they had an opportunity to have their cases considered with compassion, not just with an eye towards what the rule says. The rule of law, of course, applying the rule of law, but having an understanding for what the particular case presented. But also, long term, I think we have already touched upon this, that I hope that my time on the bench opens up the imaginations of other attorneys that have the right experience and that, come from different backgrounds, not just in terms of ethnicity, right? If you're a first generation student, if you're a first generation attorney, if you're an immigrant, if you're a person of color, no matter what, just the opportunity to know that there is room for everyone, and that everybody has a seat at the table with hard work, dedication, and the right experience.
That's so great to hear. To close, we would love to hear some personal reflections. So what has been one of your most memorable moments on the bench so far?
Yes. Oh yeah, that's fun. I have several. Of course, the investiture ceremony. When I took on when I was first sworn in, it was in the middle of the pandemic. It was COVID, and so we were not able to have our investiture ceremonies, and so that moment was memorable for me for what it represented in time, right? I had so many people to thank for the opportunities that I was afforded that allowed me to get to the bench, but also those that helped me so much in my campaign and trying to get here. So that moment was memorable for me because it was a moment of gratitude that I was able to give thanks, not just to everybody who had supported me, my husband, my children, my mother, and all my family members, but my colleagues and friends, but also a gratitude to God for the opportunities that I have been afforded and for the responsibility. And then I think, the memorable, I remember my very first opinion. So one thing that I didn't know, because, when you're looking at Westlaw and you're getting all these opinions, you don't see it, but we have to actually sign our opinions. And so when I had the first opinion, it was COVID, and we didn't have, we were trying to figure out, I was here in the court and coming in, and my then staff attorney said, you need to sign this opinion, which is, to anybody else, it's not a big deal, but I think I remember at that moment, it struck me that, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be the first woman in the long line of generations that came before me who did not have the opportunity to go to school, who did not have the opportunity to go to college. And here I was as a justice signing my very first opinion with my hand. And I get emotional when I talk about this because
It's okay.
it was their hands. My mother, my grandmother, and the long line of women who had really worked really hard and didn't have those opportunities. And so that was my.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That is so
Yeah.
beautiful, and I'm sure they're so proud of you. Like, I can't imagine how amazingly proud they are of all you've accomplished. So that you should be proud of yourself too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's so amazing.
That's beautiful. I know I can definitely relate, and I'm sure a lot of our audience can relate to that feeling of
Yeah.
being the first in your
Yes.
family to, do anything.
Yeah, and to open more doors, because like you're
Absolutely.
opening more doors to people in your family just by doing what you've been doing. That's
Mhm.
amazing.
And you've been such a great addition to the First Court of Appeals, as we know, and you've recently announced your campaign for Reelection. So as you begin your Reelection campaign, what do you hope that voters and the community understand most about your work?
Well, and I think that it goes back to what we were talking about. It's so important, and it's part of our responsibility also to make sure that we educate the public about what our courts do. How does the system work? Why is it fair? Why, despite everything we're hearing, this is a good system. It's a system that protects your rights, that protects the rule of law, that the people who sit in these courts do it with diligence and with hard work and dedication, and with a very serious understanding of how serious the work is. But more than that, I think what I would hope to tell people is that these are their courts, not our courts. And that, now, for example, this podcast, you're live streaming it through YouTube. We live stream all of our arguments through YouTube because it's important that the public feels that they can see what is happening in our courts, that there's a level of transparency, and that it should not feel like these doors are not open to the public for them to come and see what is happening and what we're doing and how we make these decisions. It's the level of transparency is what I'm hoping to achieve, and people understand that these are their courts and that these seats and the courts and the system belongs to them, not to the judges and the attorneys who advocate and happen to practice in these courts on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a very lovely, great message to pass across. Thank you so much, Justice, for joining us on our episode of Emphasis Added. It's been a great honor having you. Before we close, is there anything additional you want to share to our audience, be it advice to students, reflections on your judicial journey, or anything else on your mind?
No, well, I want to thank you both for taking the time. I know you guys are so busy in the midst of finals. And so the fact that you took this much time, I'm very proud of the both of you, as I've said, for all of your accomplishments as well. To all of the students, not just to you, you know, you are the future of our profession. And so just, you know, keep working hard and, you know, pursue your objectives and your dreams. But in what you do, just remember the importance of our profession and the responsibility that comes with it, because it's so very important. You're going to be the guardians of our profession moving forward.
Thank you so much for that great advice.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo what Tammy said. It's been really an honor being able to come back here and learn about your story and everything that's driven you for your career. So yeah, just thank you again, and thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Emphasis Added. Make sure you follow us on your favorite podcast platform.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.